Warning! This program contains strong adult language, violence, and brief nudity. It's everything you're looking for. Live from the Sims Tower in the Robinson Auto Group studio, we are AM 1600 WKKX.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Whispers Radio here on AM 1600 WKKX, the Valley's Watchdog, and UPRN, the UFO Paranormal Radio Network. It is 6:07 p.m. I don't have anything
84 degrees.
It is warm.
TV is saying. I know, and because they were saying late afternoon storms, the winds were going to pick up to 50 miles an hour, which they might be gusting.
It is a little windy.
But I closed everything up this morning when I left for work because I thought, well, it'd be my luck. I would be late getting home and everything would be wet. So, beautiful day. Went home, opened everything, thought, no, I better close everything up. Looks gorgeous outside, so.
I think there was one day you opened everything up and then it stormed.
Yes, and I was texting like mad. Somebody get home and close the windows. Yeah.
Oh, man. Give us a call, 304-214-1600. If you're out of the area, 1-866-514-1600. That's toll free. I'm Jordan Klein. She is the lovely Lola Miller. I listened the other day. I listened to the old episode we had with Riley Martin. That guy was fun.
Oh, yeah.
I think I'm going to try to get him back on. John might like that. I'll have John back on for that. He was a hoot. That was, I think it was in like 2010. If anybody's out there wants to check out our website, whispersradio.com, you can search old shows. Look for the one with Riley Martin. It'll definitely make your day. It was entertaining. Let's see. We haven't had a UFO show in a little while. So I know we mentioned a little bit about UFOs last week, just that there's been more and more going on. Our guest today is Mr. Kevin Randell. He wrote a book called Crash, When UFOs Fall from the Sky. And we're going to discuss UFOs. Kevin, you with us?
I certainly am.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. How about you?
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Crash, When UFOs Fall from the Sky. Is that your newest book?
Actually, my newest book is called
Reflections of a UFO Investigator.
Yes. Crash came out about a year and a half ago.
Okay, see, that's the one I got from the publicist. So
Yes.
All right, well, which one would you rather talk about?
We can talk about them both, but since you brought up Crash, maybe we ought to go with that one first.
All righty. Now, is this specifically about Roswell, or are there more crashes that we don't know about?
Oh, this was a compendium. I looked at several hundred reported crashes, and if you go on the Internet and you type in UFO crash on your search engine, you can find lists of up to 300 crashes, which is a preposterous number. They just can't be raining out of the sky in that way.
Now, was there something, I don't know if you saw the news this past, was it the weekend of the week? There was something up in the northern U.S., I think the northeast part. I can't remember exactly what state it's in, but they said a big ball, like the size of a bus or something, the size of a whale of light, crashed into a pond.
There are any number of stories like that. I saw that briefly, and I'm thinking about, as I was talking about the book to someone else, they mentioned a crash in Minnesota where something was seen to fall into a lake.
That might have been it.
But no, this was a number of years ago.
Oh, maybe it wasn't.
Yes, but it turns out it really wasn't something that fell into a lake. It was the witness saw something bubbling in the lake and thought something had fallen. And when they looked, they found some metallic object at the bottom of the lake, but when they finally got down there, they discovered it was basically a washing machine. so that when you start looking at these things and you don't get a good solid feeling, something fell into a lake. I'm sorry, that just doesn't do much for us. We've got to have a lot more information to go on. So when I was doing the book, I was looking for that information to suggest that if there was a solution, could we bring that solution forward and get rid of this case from the list, or was there something truly mysterious about it? And when you talk about something falling into the lake, what I think of immediately is the Shag Harbor crash from October of 1968, which was investigated by Chris Stiles and Don Ledger, and they helped me with information for the book, so I got updated information for them about that case. But here was something that was seen to fall in the lake. There's a photograph of the object in the sky. You've got witnesses seeing the thing falling toward the lake. You've got witnesses on fishing boats seeing the thing underwater. You've got the United States Navy responding to it. You've got the Canadian Navy responding to it. And apparently you've got the Soviet Navy responding to it as well. So something clearly fell into the lake. The documentation that they were able to uncover shows a great response by various intelligence and military agencies to this. The documentation is there. The only question is what fell into the lake or in Shag Harbor. Was it extraterrestrial, or was it something that we had launched that had gone astray? And by we, I mean people of Earth. So that question hasn't been resolved. But here's a case where something truly mysterious happened. Something truly fell into the water, and there was a documentation to respond to it. So we've got to look at that thing a little bit more closely and see if we can figure out exactly what it was. What's really annoying about it is during the Condon Committee, that was the University of Colorado study of UFOs. The Air Force paid them $550,000 to see if there's anything to UFOs. This thing happened during their tenure. They were going to go out and look at current cases. Here was a case they should have gone out and looked at, and what they did was they phoned up to Canada, and somebody said, a couple of teenagers said they saw something, and the Condon Committee said, we're not going to go up there. Turns out to be much more important than some teenagers claiming to have seen something, because not only did the teenagers see it, they reported it to the Mounties, who also saw it, and talked to other police agencies in Canada who also had members of their team seeing it. So there was a great body of evidence, and had the Condon Committee done their job the way they should have, we might have an answer for A, what fell into the harbor, and B, what are UFOs? Yeah. Are they extraterrestrial?
Just to clarify, I did find that article. It was on Fox. It says, glowing whale-sized objects falls from the sky into Connecticut Lake.
There you go.
And that was April 12th.
And it's on Fox News.
Yeah.
I won't say anything. I didn't mean that, because I actually watch Fox News periodically. I shouldn't be mean to them.
That's okay. You can say it. Believe me.
Well, I don't watch them often, so there.
Okay.
Now, you left with a question before I interrupted you. Are they extraterrestrial?
So, in relation to the Shag Harbor case, was it something extraterrestrial? I think when we look at some of the other crash reports, and Roswell, of course, springs to mind, that clearly was something extraterrestrial. Other reports we have, I think, are misidentifications of meteorites. And what really is surprising, there's a show on called Meteorite Men. It's on the Science Channel.
Okay.
And periodically they show video of meteors falling or what meteoroids, I guess is what they call them, falling to the ground. There's a lot of that. In fact, on my blog, I've linked to something called the Meteorite Compilation, and it's 3 minutes and 19 seconds of these a video of things falling from the sky. And what struck me about looking at that is how, as the meteor begins to break up, you get what looks like a glowing cockpit and then a series of windows behind it. And we have any number of UFO sightings just exactly like that. And I think before I'd seen that, there were UFO sightings that had been reported that seemed very mysterious until you realize, well, these very bright meteors, these what they call bolides, may be responsible for some of that, and we have to bring that forward. And looking at some of the reports in the books, I'm pretty sure that we can solve them as meteorites, some falling from the sky. If you get a look at this thing slowly, or you freeze frame on those videos, it just looks exactly like some of the descriptions that we get on that. So I'm thinking that's maybe what we have. The other thing on bolides is they often make a roaring sound in their detonations because they're traveling faster than the speed of sound. So you get the booms as it goes. It breaks the sound barrier. So we get the type that the people are reporting accurately what they've seen. Their interpretation, or our interpretation as investigators, is often that it's something extraterrestrial, when in fact Well, it actually is something extraterrestrial.
Yeah.
It's just not controlled by an alien entity. It's an extraterrestrial event that we have the privilege of seeing, but it's nothing to suggest that there are alien creatures flying around.
Now, what are your thoughts, I guess, being a UFO researcher yourself, with UFOs, do you believe that there is alien intelligence, at least behind some of them?
Oh, absolutely. I think Roswell is the case in point. And I say that Don Schmidt and I, and then Tom Carey, Don Schmidt and I, and others have investigated this case for literally decades now. I think we went to Roswell the first time in 1989.
Uh-huh.
So that gives you how long I've been looking at the case. And what we found a great number of witnesses. What strikes me as odd is we found every member of Colonel Blanchard's staff, Colonel Blanchard being the commanding officer of the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell at the time. So he's the top guy. Every member of his staff we could find told us it was extraterrestrial with one exception. And the guy clearly doesn't want to get involved in all these investigations, but or having a lot of people calling. But the thing that strikes me, and here's the guys who were basically in charge, basically running the only atomic strike force in the world at the time. And they're telling us, well, we saw something extraterrestrial. This was something that felt it was extraterrestrial. So you're thinking, well, I really didn't want these guys' fingers on the trigger if they're so dumb they couldn't recognize something terrestrial as being terrestrial and believed it to be something from outer space. But the Air Force, we actually forced the Air Force to reinvestigate this thing in the mid-1990s. And they came up with this cockamamie idea. It was Project Mogul balloon. They said in 1947 when confronted with this, they said, well, we've looked at it, it was a weather balloon, but now we've studied again, and it was a weather balloon. Same explanation, just prettied it up by calling it Project Mogul. But the thing is, the Air Force is mistaken on that. And what strikes me as really odd is when they made that announcement back in the mid-1990s, people laughed at it, thought it was stupid. And now you see people, intelligent people, saying, well, the Air Force solved the Roswell case as a balloon. No, they didn't. They just put a label on it and ran away, didn't bother with the evidence. They interviewed like 7 people. 5 of them belonged to Project Mogul. Why didn't they Why didn't they interview the Air Force officers we'd talked to, because many of them were still alive? I would have given them the names. I talked to the Air Force investigator a number of times. I tried to give them the stuff. Why don't you talk to General Exxon, who was involved in this? But I think the Air Force didn't want to be caught in the unenviable position of saying one of their generals is an idiot.
Well, what it is, it's more like politics runs today, where you have somebody saying wrong information, and then instead of daring anybody to prove them otherwise, it's oh well, if you don't believe me, you're just an idiot, and we're gonna call you names and oust you publicly.
Yes.
And
yes, and the Air Force. The Air Force attacks me because of what we've said and how we're silly for believing in aliens. But in the mid-1990s, when their story was first published, you can see in the press conference the news media is not believing them, and now everybody seems to, well, it was Project Mogul. That explains it. Well, no, it doesn't explain it. We may not be able to prove Roswell is extraterrestrial, but we can certainly prove it wasn't Project Mogul. And so that leaves you with no explanation other than the extraterrestrial.
Yeah. Now, have you, in your investigations, have you actually been able to investigate like a fresh crash?
No, I don't. The problem with the crashes, most of them are bogus, and they're based on a single witness. They're based on secondhand testimony. They happened a long time ago, and I think Len Stringfield, who kind of invented the crash retrieval subset of UFO research, found the same thing as he was publishing his status reports. Many of them were single witness. Many of them didn't have a lot of information to back them up, and when you begin to check into them, they begin to break down. One of the key cases was the Del Rio UFO crash, which was published as happening on December 6, 1950. And as I got into it in the book, I was looking at the information, so I typed the Del Rio crash into my search engine, proving that the Internet is a wonderful research tool if you actually know how to do it and interpret what it says. But I found the story being told in 2008, 2009 substantially different than the story that was being told in the late 1970s. And so I got into looking at this, and I asked the guys who had written a book about the Del Rio crash, I said, did you investigate this guy's background? Did you check to see if he was really a military officer? And they said, well, no, but they thought Todd Zeckel had done that. And besides that, they had some documentation and some photographs of him in his Air Force uniform. And so I asked, and they sent me copies of that, and I realized that the documentation related to the Civil Air Patrol, which is an auxiliary of the Air Force, a wonderful organization, but it's not really part of the Air Force. You don't get paid by the Air Force, and you don't get retirement points. But it performs a very valuable service in its search and rescue work. So you've got basically private pilots, sort of under the Air Force umbrella, if you will, looking for missing aircraft and things like that at a fraction of the cost of what it would do to put the Air Force or the Coast Guard up.
So it's just not as legit as it could have been.
And but the thing is, I found that his claim to have been an Air Force officer, the main witness, the Air Force officer, was untrue. I've got the pictures were all in Civil Air Patrol uniforms, and so when I asked about checking his credentials, I was told, well, Todd Zeckel did it, and Bruce Maccabee knows about it. So I asked Bruce Maccabee, and Bruce said, no, Todd Zeckel done it. And I decided nobody had done it, so I checked, and there was absolutely nothing to suggest he was an Air Force officer. Clearly he was in the Civil Air Patrol. Clearly he was respected as a Civil Air Patrol officer, but he wasn't in the Air Force, and that changes the complexion of his story.
Yeah.
Because if he wasn't an Air Force officer, then he wasn't flying Air Force fighters when he saw this thing. And I learned that that the original story was told in a little shopper-type newspaper in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in 1968, I think it was. I couldn't find that, but I found in the MUFON Journal, or the Skylook, which was the forerunner to that, a paragraph about this case. And it turns out he originally said there were 3 objects. He originally said he was flying F-94s with the Air Force, and he originally said it happened in 1948. So the original witness has changed his story at least 3 times, and he wasn't an Air Force officer, so he couldn't have been flying an Air Force fighter, not to mention the fact in 1948 the F-94 didn't exist. But there are still people that believe this story, and they said, well, your mind is so closed, you just won't open it to the evidence. And I'm thinking, what evidence? The guy has presented nothing to prove that he was an Air Force officer. And they say, well, his records were purged by the Air Force. Can't be done. Cannot be done because there are so many ancillary areas to look. If you were to look at my background, for example, I say, well, I was an Army helicopter pilot, and you say, okay, prove it. If you went to the archives in St. Louis, you'd find documentation proving it. But even if it wasn't there, I found online a picture of my flight school class, for crying out loud. I found online one of the units I belonged to in Vietnam. I'm mentioned in that. You can prove it from a lot of different ways. You can check with the flight schools. You can find out that I was at the flight school at the right time. With this guy, nothing of that checked out. So clearly, once you've made the due diligence of your search and find out that nothing is as it has been said, then the only conclusion you can draw is it didn't happen. And yet I still have to fight that battle every other week, it seems.
Now, when you're, how do I want to say this? When you're doing your investigations and when you're coming against people that are apparently so open-minded that, they don't do their research, how do you make your research, like when you write it out and you fill out your final copy, how do you make yours more legit to the public?
Publish your sources.
Okay.
Explain where the information came from, how it was gathered. Record the interviews, because I've had any number of times when I've written something and the subject of the interview has come back and said, "Oh, I didn't say that. How would you like to hear it?"
Yeah,
on tape. Now, one guy said that he had J. Bond Johnson, who claimed to be the Roswell photographer, but he took pictures of the debris and actually of the weather balloon in General Ramey's office later in the day. But I had written that he'd said that Ramey didn't know what it was that Ramey knew what it was when he got there, and that sort of thing. And Johnson says, well, I never would have said that. And I said, would you like to hear yourself on tape say it at least 3 times? And he'd written an article. He claimed to have written an article for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. He was a reporter, photographer for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram.
Yeah.
And he sent me a copy of the article, and he mentioned in the tapes that he'd written the article 7 times. And I pointed out the last paragraph said the exact same thing that I had said, that Ramey, when he saw it, said it was a weather balloon. Well, then he says, I never said I wrote the article, because there was no byline on it. Well, would you like to hear yourself say that 7 times? So you end up in these idiotic fights like that. And what was interesting, he would get his friends to write to me, and they would say, well, he didn't do this, and he didn't do that, and he said this. And I'd send them copies of the tape, and I'd never hear from them again, because they realized I was telling the truth. The only thing they caught me at was in one of the transcripts, I'd left a word out. As I was transcribing the tape, and it was like a conjunction, I'd left that word out. So there was a great mistake that I had made. I'd left a conjunction out, but we still end up in that fight.
Wow.
On a daily basis. This guy was running around. He died, so I won. But he was running around telling people that I had misquoted him, and he'd been trying for years to get me to change the quotes, and I would say, where do you say I misquoted you? Prove it. I had sent him originally an edited copy of the tape, which carried some of the things he'd said on it, so he could hear himself saying it, and that wasn't good enough. And so I finally sent him twice the whole 4 hours of tape interview I had with him, so he could listen to the whole thing and hear him say that stuff. But he would go around and say, well, Kevin Randell edited the tape. Yeah, one of them for you for your convenience, but you now have the full copies. And I would, like I said, I would send them to his partners in crime, and they would, I'd never hear from him again, because they would listen to the tapes and hear him saying the things that I'd said. He'd said there was nowhere else to go with it. You can't change it. The tape clearly wasn't edited. The tape clearly wasn't massaged. It was clearly this guy saying this in many, many places and many, many times that General Ramey told him that it was a weather balloon when he got there.
Well, best to keep good records then.
And that's the point that to really get to your question, or get back to the question, that's how you do it. You provide the sources so that if you're so inclined, if you as a reader are so inclined, you can follow the same path and get to the same point and say, yeah, the guy was right.
So with this, do you have any kind of history as a journalist?
Well, I did a lot of writing. I've done magazine and newspaper articles, yes. When I was in Iraq, I was a public affairs officer as an additional duty. Let me point that way. And I got 50 or 60 articles about our unit's activities overseas in the newspapers around where our soldiers were drawn from. I did a column for a couple of years for the Roswell Daily Record. I've done magazine articles, started the magazine articles in Sauga's UFO report back in the mid-1970s. So I have a history of that. I've taken journalism classes in college, wrote for the college newspaper, and have written 112 books. So, yeah, I got something of a background in.
You always notice the people with the journalism backgrounds always keep better records of sources. It shouldn't be that way, because if you're going to be an investigator of UFOs, and I kind of talk about this a little bit in Reflections, you've got to be able to prove what you say, and the best way to do it is tape the interviews. I know with Bob Pratt, who was a journalist for a long time, and he did very credible UFO stories for the National Enquirer, and I always hesitate to say that because people look askance at the National Enquirer, but Bob Pratt did very good work on the UFO stuff for them. And there was a controversy over an interview done with Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer in Roswell, and the way the transcript had been done. And so I asked Bob Pratt at one point, do you still have the tape? And he said, no, we reuse those tapes all the time. So it was gone. Yeah. But there's one point in the interview where if you insert a comma, you change the meaning of the answer completely. Uh-huh. And it was about Jesse Marcel, that he had been shot down while he was overseas in the Pacific during World War II. And Pratt asked, everybody survived? And he said, all but one got out. All but one, got out. One guy crashed into the mountain. But if you insert a comma, it changes from everybody got out except for one guy to
everybody crashed into the mountain but one guy. So you change the meaning of the sentence, and it's just the insertion of the comma does it. So I was hoping that we'd have a tape and we'd get a better feel for exactly how that question was asked and how Marcel specifically framed the answer. And there were some other problems with that interview where it would have been nice to have the tape so we'd know exactly what he'd said based on the transcript that we had. He said at one point that Jesse Marcel said at one point that he had flown as a pilot. And everybody looked at his military record and said that he wasn't a pilot in the military. Well, that's really not what he said. What he said, he had flown as a pilot, not that he was a pilot. I can say I flew as a door gunner in Vietnam, as a helicopter door gunner in Vietnam. I wasn't assigned to a unit as a helicopter door gunner. I was assigned as a helicopter pilot. So I can put myself into the helicopters flying in Vietnam. But I also, because of the way things work, once in a while I flew as a door gunner. But you find nothing in my record to support that thing. And when Marcel said he'd flown as a pilot, I think that word is very critical. Flown as a pilot, not that he was a pilot, but he'd flown as a pilot. And I have nothing with that because I know we in our unit sometimes had the crew chiefs and the door gunners who were enlisted men.
Yeah,
we would have them up front, giving them basic helicopter instruction. So they could say they'd flown as pilots. I can say I've flown as a door gunner, but nothing in the record would reflect those specific things.
Yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do.
And sometimes you just do it for the heck of it.
I want to ask you, because you say you did put 200 some crashes in your book.
I think there's 118 different crashes listed in the book, and the vast majority of them, all but 4 or 5, are explainable. There's a couple of them that I don't have a final answer on. I believe there's going to be a terrestrial explanation, but I haven't gotten to that point yet. So those are kind of open-ended.
All right, well, I want to ask you, we are in Wheeling, West Virginia right now.
Oh, my God, no.
Yeah.
Isn't that Wheeling by God, West Virginia?
Yeah.
Yes, and we frequently refer to it, but it depends on where you put the comma.
There you go.
We've had people on before that have talked about a crash here in Wheeling, up in Oglebay, and I didn't know if maybe you've come across something like that in your book.
I don't remember a West Virginia crash in the book.
Okay.
Like I said, there's 118 of them, and some of them were like single witness. So I don't. I did the basic research to see what I could find. If there was an answer, then I provided it right away. I know, for example, there was one near Fort Polk, Louisiana, that was single witness, and it happened in like 1948, and it just never went anywhere. So the conclusion is this is a story somebody told or somebody got garbled. It wasn't even the original source telling it. It was second or third hand. So there's any number of cases like that when you look in the book where at the time I got the best information we could about it. A lot of them didn't go anywhere because it was single witness and there wasn't anywhere else to go. With Roswell, for example, the key was Walter Hott, who was the public affairs officer at the base at the time, the fact that he'd produced a yearbook. So we had a listing, because of the yearbook, of everybody assigned to the base in 1947. So we had a real good starting place there. Now, so if Jesse Marcel had been the sole man talking about this UFO crash, we could say, well, that's a single witness case. It really doesn't mean much. But then you talk to Edwin Easley, who was the provost marshal, the top cop on the base, telling me that it was extraterrestrial. You've got Patrick Saunders, who was the base adjutant, talking about how they'd managed to hide all the money that they spent on the investigation, because in the military you've got to account for all the money. So if you're moving parts of a crashed UFO from Roswell, New Mexico to Wright Field in Ohio, you've got to account for that expense. But if you write it off as a training exercise or a cross-country mission for training purposes, well, you've accounted for the money, but you've been able to move all this stuff without leaving a record of exactly what you had moved. So you have to look
sneaky.
at all. Yeah, well, you have to look at all that stuff. But this is what Patrick Saunders said, and we found I talked to an MP, and I said, "Were you involved in this?" And he said, "No, I really wasn't. I heard some of the other guys talking about it, but I didn't believe them until I saw the article in the newspaper, which was the July 8th, 1947 newspaper, which says that they captured the RAAF, Roswell Army Airfield, captures a flying saucer in the Roswell region. So once he saw the article, he believed his friends talking about the flying saucer. So we've got a lot of that sort of thing. We've got people who are involved at all levels of the retrieval operation, from the very basic guys as well, yeah, I picked up some of the debris or I nailed it into a crate to have it shipped off, to the guys that said, yeah, there were bodies and here's what we did with them. So we've got the whole range of people, and it's not one or two witnesses.
What are the stories that they did with the bodies?
What we know is they took them to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Field at the time. According to General Exxon, they sent one to Denver, and Denver at the time at Lowry Air Force, well, it wasn't Lowry Air Force Base, it became Lowry Air Force Base, but they took one there because the Army had a mortuary service there, so they took the body there, and the assumption would be they were trying to figure out the best way to preserve it without contaminating it. We've heard that one of them had gone to MacDill, I think it was MacDill, which had a big aerospace medical facility there in the 50s, so that as our technology improved and our capabilities improved, they did things with it so they could learn more about it, apply our new knowledge to their research. But what we know is based on the guys who were in Roswell at the time, they took the stuff to Dayton, Ohio.
Now, I've got a question. I get it back in the 40s and 50s that our government, right or wrong, would have felt that people would have panicked had they come out with, the fact that there were ETs or whatever you want to call them. But now, in this day and age, particularly with all of the science fiction that's out there and people's acceptance more and more to believe that this kind of thing has happened and they're capable of doing this, why is the government continuing to lie, aside to cover their own butt, the fact that they've been lying all along and they never want to admit, that they've told a lie? But I can't see what the benefit is now to continuing to keep everybody in the dark and keep this farce up, if indeed it's true.
And I agree with you. I understand it, too. In 1947, they didn't know what they were dealing with.
Yeah.
They're presented with something that is unique. How are we going to respond to it? How are the people going to respond to it? Not to mention the fact, if we can figure out how these things work, we've taken a huge step beyond our competitors in the world at the time, the Soviets. Mm-hmm. So if we can figure out the propulsion systems, and we can figure out what it's made of, and we can figure out all the things that makes it work, we're going to be that much further ahead of our competitors in the world. So it makes perfect sense in 1947 and in that era. I do not know why that cover-up persists today, because I agree with you that people wouldn't be panicked by the idea.
Just tradition?
I would say that once you get something classified, it's very difficult to declassify it. As we know, we found classified records of troop movements during World War I, and you're thinking, well, troop movements during World War I at the time would have needed to be classified, but here, nearly 100 years later, the information we can share with everybody, because it's not going to adversely impact anyone. Mm-hmm. I think all the World War I vets, with one or two exceptions, have passed away, so we're not going to harm them in any way at all.
Yeah.
So you've got something classified. The classification persists, but I also think that the number of people involved in this study or the oversight has steadily shrunk, so that we're to the point where there's a few people controlling the information, and unless the president asks specifically for the information, it's not given to him on a routine basis. There was an FBI operation through the much of the Cold War called Operation Solo, and what had happened is a fellow named Childs and his brother during the 20s and 30s had been members of the Communist Party, but they became very disillusioned with the Communist Party, but they were also considered great communists by the Soviets, and they would take many trips to the Soviet Union. Well, it turned out that in the 1930s, they had gone to the FBI and said, hey, this isn't working out. And so they were considered just great communists. The Soviets treated them very well, shared all kinds of information with them, and they'd bring it back and give it to the FBI. And the FBI, the guys working in the office, in the New York office, most of them didn't even know that this was going on. because they needed to protect Childs, because if the Soviets, of course, found out, they'd eliminated him immediately.
Yeah.
But the only time they ever told the president about this operation was Gerald Ford, and he had just taken over the presidency. Ford was going to be meeting with the Soviet leadership, and he felt unprepared and was worried about it, and so the FBI told him, listen, here's the deal. We know what's going on in the Kremlin because the Soviets are sharing this information with Morris Childs. He's giving it all to us. That was the only time that they told him. The president never asked the FBI, you got a mole inside the Kremlin, because he didn't care. It was not on his plate. And I think with the UFOs, we're in the same boat. I mean, President Obama has a lot on his plate, and UFOs really don't matter that much. I mean, it's not going to adversely affect the election. It's not going to adversely affect life in the United States or the world to learn these things.
That and we're in like 3 wars now with Iran getting crazy out there.
Well, we're not involved in that. I think we're only in one war at the moment, which would be Afghanistan. We've got so, well, I guess technically we're still at war in Korea because there was an armistice but never a peace treaty, so we're still at war with the North Koreans, technically.
Yeah.
But there's
too much to think about with UFOs.
Yeah, there's all this going on, and he's not going to say, hey, did the Roswell thing happen? He's busy with what he needs to do, and there's no imperative for him to know this information. If he wanted to find out, he certainly could, being the president, but there's no imperative for him to find out because he's got to deal with all this other stuff. And I think that's the way it is with a lot of the presidents in the past. They haven't had to deal with this stuff. Harry Truman had to deal with it because it happened on his watch. 1947 Roswell, it was on his watch. Did it get shared with Eisenhower? It may well have, because of things that happened in 1952, right after Eisenhower won the election, or just prior to Eisenhower winning the election. But from that point on, I don't think the information was routinely shared with the president.
Well, in 52, wasn't there also a standing order to shoot any UFO down?
No, I'm not sure it was any, but there was an order to shoot one down. Certainly, that order was issued. But there were lots of things about UFOs issued. There was a order given, or not an order, but an Air Force officer wrote a letter to a number of his colleagues saying, flying saucer, serious business. Frank Edwards took that as the title of his book.
Uh-huh.
So there was a lot of discussion like that. And I know that there were times when our fighters intercepted UFOs and fired on them. They didn't bring anything down, but they did do that. So there's that sort of thing going on. But as I say, in today's world, there's no pressure on the president to learn this stuff. There's no pressure to release the information, and I just think that everybody who might be able to force this, whether it's the news media or congressional committees or whatever, are busy dealing with other more
important.
I wasn't going to say important. I was going to say imperative problems.
Okay.
Things that are impacting us today. We got to deal with this rather than worry about UFOs, which we could deal with down the road if we get the time to deal with it.
Now, let me ask you, because we've been talking about Roswell as like one of the crashes that you couldn't explain. Were there any crashes that maybe we don't really know about, kind of in the mainstream, that you would say were real?
Well, I don't think there's a lot of people in the United States that are aware of the Shag Harbor event, and that would be one that springs to mind immediately. I would say, had we had the discussion a year ago or a year and a half ago, I would say the Las Vegas crash from April of 1962. But I'm now leaning toward the idea that Las Vegas may have been a meteorite. Contrary to what I wrote in the book, I'm thinking, having seen some of these videos of the meteors coming down that the meteorite men put on their program, I'm wondering if maybe this didn't confuse people. So there's that sort of thing. There's some interesting events. Jim Clarkson out in Washington State has an interesting case from 1978 that I don't think a lot of people know about, and he's done some very interesting research about that. I'm, again, thinking we may have today a solution to that, but it's, I need to talk to Jim about that a little bit more. When I wrote the book, I know Jim had provided me with a lot of good information, a lot of assistance in it. But since that time, I've looked at some of the some of these meteorite things, and I'm just wondering if maybe that doesn't explain it. I'm just not real sure about that.
The meteorite, that I never heard that before, that it would resemble pretty much a cockpit on fire with people behind it.
I did an article on my blog about that and put up some of the pictures. I took still frames from these compilations of the meteor falls,
really,
and put them up there, and you see the pictures, and you say, "Oh my Lord!" And you can see the meteors as they're moving through this. You can see them breaking up, and you can either get the impression that these things are flying formation, or you get the impression of very bright light at the beginning and smaller lights trailing along the side. Well, that's as the things break apart in the air. So it's very interesting to watch that sort of thing and think that if you just caught a glimpse of this for a second or two, your mind then begins to put together what was going on, and you become a little bit confused about exactly what you saw because you didn't get a really good look at it.
Or your mind would fill in the blanks. What do they call that? Matrixing?
Well, I was thinking more in the Gestalt psychology range, but you can call it matrixing if you like.
Now, what's your blog? What's your website that we can get to?
The blog is called kevinrandell.blogspot.com, and if you type in the word "a different perspective," I think it comes up first on that. So the blog is called A Different Perspective, but it's at Kevin Randell, and my last name is spelled Randla, but kevinrandell.blogspot.com, and I think even if you misspell my last name, it still comes up. Because I've been around long enough doing this that I've bubbled to the top of the Google search engine.
Hey, you do what you got to do. Where can we find the pictures of the meteorites?
If you go to they're of course in my blog, and there's a search engine on the blog, sponsored by Google, of course. And if you just type in meteorites or meteorite men, it'll give you the listings where all those keywords have come up, so you can see them. But if you go to YouTube and you type in meteor compilation, it should come up first, and it's 3 minutes and 19 seconds. So it's not just one; it's a couple of dozen of these things falling, and some of them aren't very spectacular. They're seen from the cameras of police cruisers, and you just see the bright light flashing in the distance and that sort of thing. Some of them are from security cameras.
Uh-huh.
So you see the light coming over the top, and you can see the shadows move at night. And some of them they're right on the object coming down, and you can watch it break up, and you can see the way it trails off. And so you can take a look at that and get a good idea of what it looks like.
Yeah, I never stopped to think about it, that if it was, something like a meteor that was breaking apart, it would look like something flying in formation.
I never thought of that either until I saw the opening to one of the Meteor Men shows, and they showed one scene of this object coming apart. And I thought, oh, my Lord.
Yeah.
That looks an awful lot like some of the descriptions. There was a sighting in 1948 by two pilots, and I think the object was coming at them, but they described a cigar-shaped object, and they described square windows on it. In 1968, the Zond 4 spacecraft re-entered. It broke apart and re-entered. And a lot of people drew a cigar-shaped craft with square windows on it based on that re-entry. We know exactly what caused the sighting. It was in fact a spacecraft coming down and breaking up, one launch, I think, by the Soviets. But the point simply is, it gave us the first clue, and then seeing this thing on the Meteorite Men and seeing the video of them coming down, and you think, oh, my Lord, that looks exactly like some of the descriptions we've got.
All right, what about the Phoenix episode?
The Phoenix Lights?
The Phoenix Lights, I think a lot of the footage is military flares, as people said, but there's a series of sightings embedded in that are unexplained. Because the object was seen moving from, I think, Tucson toward the north, toward Phoenix, and up toward, Wickenburg, and north toward Kingman, in that area, over a period of time. So there are some of the Phoenix Light sightings that are explained, but there are also some of them that are not, and that's a series of sightings. It's kind of like the Lubbock lights from 1951. Some of the sightings are explained, but the photographs taken, for example, by Carl Hart Jr., have never been satisfactorily explained. So you've got some very good sightings embedded in a whole bunch of sightings.
I find all this stuff just so fascinating. But I do not want to meet somebody from outer space.
Well, it depends on their attitude.
Well, from everything, people that have had experiences that I don't know, that they may not be malicious, but I don't think they're real nice.
But you're basing that on researchers' opinions, and if you take a look at the researchers, you can see how their opinions influence the witnesses they've talked to. And I know of one case where a woman thought of her experiences with the aliens as being very pleasant and very nice until the investigator started putting her in hypnotic regression, and then she became very frightened by the whole event. And I think that's more a result of the hypnotist, the investigator's personal belief structure, as opposed to what the woman really felt about her experiences. And I don't know of anything that really suggests that they're hostile. There's nothing to suggest they're overly beneficial or either.
Yeah.
But there are any number of cases where it's not harmful to either side, us or them. Although there's a number of cases where we shoot at them, which I always thought was kind of stupid.
Yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say.
Definitely.
Here are potentially craft that have flown gazillions of miles by a people that are so far superior to us in physics and everything, and we're going to try and take them out with machine guns. Really? You think that's really going to work?
Well, the other thing you have to look at, there's a wonderful movie called Morons from Outer Space.
Kind of like Spaceballs, but
no, these were aliens, and they'd come to Earth in a spaceship that the very intelligent people had built. But
these
but
were
they
the
weren't
monkeys.
They weren't the brightest bulbs in the display. And you think about that, and you think about our society. Most of us couldn't build an airplane, but we can learn to fly it pretty easily.
Yeah.
Most of us couldn't build a car, but we know how to drive them.
Yeah.
But we don't understand a lot of how it functions. And you think about, well, the aliens coming to there, they may not do it, and they may not be the brightest bulbs in the display. They may be more scientifically oriented, where they're just coming to study our society and how our civilization is growing and how we're expanding and how we're dealing with the problems that we're creating today. But they're not here to help us. They're just here to study us as we would go study the chimpanzees or the mountain gorilla or the meerkats, for crying out loud, and learning about their societies and how they operate. So it's it may be they're not kind, but they're not evil either. They're just sort of there.
They're busy.
Yeah, we're busy gathering our stuff, and we've already looked at the human animal. We're going to look for something else now.
We're going to look for the intelligent beings on this planet.
We heard there was. Yeah, no, we're going to go talk to the dolphins.
Yeah.
Where can we get your books?
You can find my books, by golly, at the bookstore.
Uh-huh.
You can go to Amazon.com. A number of them are Kindles, so if you've got a Kindle reader or you've got an iPad, I know my iPad's got a Kindle app on it, so I can download Kindle books on there, which is really kind of neat, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I
love my Kindle.
Well, my Kindle is more than just a Kindle, but
Yeah, mine's not.
But I love my Kindle app. So there's a number of books on Kindle. So if you wanted to read Crash, like in 30 seconds, meaning you want it 30 seconds from now, you can download it at Kindle. You can get Reflections of a UFO Investigator the same way, so you can read it in 30 seconds. If you're more tactically oriented, you can buy the book and they'll send it to you in a couple of days. So you can get it through Amazon. You can go to the bookstores. You can find them in the bookstores.
That's good. And your website was
kevinrandell.blogspot.com. Yes.
Kevin Randell, and that's Randle.
Yes, it is.
.blogspot.com. And
yes.
If anybody wants to report any kind of crash, are you into that, or are you? You
can get in contact me through the blog. There's a post office box there that you can send me a message through that as well. So if you've got something going on, you feel the need to talk to me about it, Yeah, send me a note.
Well, I want to ask you, as an investigator, do you investigate just the crashes, or do you do sightings and such like that also?
I was about to say no. I do lots of other stuff, but the one I've been working on for the last week is the Aztec crash. But as I was driving into the Hy-Vee parking lot, Hy-Vee being a grocery store, my cell phone rang, and it was a guy wanting to talk about William Rhodes, and he took pictures of a UFO back in July of 1947.
Wow!
So that kind of speared or generated an interest in that case for me. So I went and looked into that. So in Reflections of a UFO Investigator, there's a story of how I got sucked into that investigation, and what I learned from it. So yeah, I do other things besides crashes, other sites of UFO sightings.
Okay, because we had two people in the chat room actually discussing a sighting that they had seen, during the show. Well, I mean, they didn't see it during the show. But yeah, so they can get up with you, and discuss with you.
Absolutely, maybe. They can take a look at the blog. Send me a letter through there. They can append a comment to one of the latest stories. There's some Roswell stuff on there. I forget what the latest one I did was. My latest blog posting was.
Well, join the club on that.
Yeah, I think my last blog that I wrote was Christmas of 2 years ago.
Mine was like a week and a half ago, and I still can't remember what it was.
Well, the extent of my blog was posting up some Pee Wee Herman video singing a Christmas song. And that was it.
I have not put Pee Wee Herman on my blog. So
well, listen, you're missing out.
Yeah. Well, I love Pee Wee Herman.
I think Lola's blog included a, hey, what is this thing?
Yeah, is this what I'm supposed to do?
And that's the only post in there.
Yep.
She's really tech savvy, as you can tell. Yet she keeps us on the air.
I just got an iPhone for Christmas, so I'm moving up in the right direction.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, Kevin, I want to thank you for your time today. Thanks for discussing your books.
Oh, not a problem at all. Love to do it.
Yeah, we enjoyed it, and we liked the topic. And we haven't had a UFO show in a while, so it was nice.
There you go.
Kevin Randell, your website, kevinrandell.blogspot.com, and your latest book, Reflections of a UFO Investigator.
That's right.
And we'll talk again.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey, thank you very much, Kevin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye. I wanted to mention on the website, we actually got a comment from Josh on our Barbara Lamb episode, because you mentioned nobody's seems to have a nice encounter with the aliens, and he said, does anybody else think after listening to this that Barbara would be the lady that was making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the aliens as they were trying to abduct her?
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of funny that that happened today.
Okay.
Okay, rush me a little more. Yeah, it's time. Okay,
I am not rushing you. Okay.
Hey, everybody. Apparently, Lola's telling me it's time to get off the air. So, until next week.
Dancing with the Stars is on.
We have to hurry. I've been watching, listen, all day I've been watching Doctor Who. You ever watch that?
Yes.
I am very much enjoying that.
It is a long series.
Yeah.
Did you start at the very beginning?
Yes.
Okay.
It's season 1 in 2005. I think there's 3 doctors since the guy that I'm watching.
Yeah.
So.
And he's the guy you're watching. I like the second guy.
Yeah.
Best, but gotta love BBC.
Oh.
Gotta love.
I'm enjoying it. I'm trying to get Sarah to watch it. She's like, I'll take a nap.
Well,
whatever.
She deserves it. She deserves it.
All right, everybody. Until next week, don't be afraid. Only believe.